I can't give a picture, but you can listen to Jimmy.
Do
Do you have a green dot with a phone in the middle?
I don't.
I
don't know what's going on here. But if I have volume, at least I can hear him.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
I could do yours. Could I try your iPad? Can you bring me your iPad?
Recording in progress.
Oh.
Hey guys.
No, not that thing. It's in my They put it there. Maybe I should look around this. You ready? Okay, should I just sit at the end? No, you sit where I am. Should I close the door? Close that. Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to Talents in Commons at the Brooks. My name is Pam Gatz, and I live in the Shadowwood development in the Brooks, and I'm so pleased to serve on the committee of Talents in the Commons with Daniela Jacob. And I would encourage all of you, if you know of anyone who has talents that they'd like to share with us, please let me or Daniela know. Just having a conversation with someone could be the next presenter, like today's presenter, Jim. Probably about a year and a half ago, I was playing pickleball with him and just waiting to get on the courts, and we had a conversation, and he started telling me a little bit about his past. And then, of course, when he said I was in Vietnam, a light bulb went up, and I said, oh my God, people would really like to learn more about that. And he's like, really? And I said, yes, they would. So let me introduce you to Jim. Jim is 75 years old. He's here today with his beautiful wife, Penny, who is also part of the presentation. I should give Penny a lot of credit for helping to prepare Jim today. So thank you, Penny. Jim is from Freeport, Illinois. He has a BA from Northern Illinois University. He has 3 sons, 3 step-grandchildren, and he and Penny have lived in Spring Run. I'll talk louder, okay. From October through May, they're here as snowbirds. And hence, when you learn more about Jim's personality, or many of you already know about his personality, he's a natural in sales and promotions. And he's the current owner of Kline's automobile sales in Freeport. His interests are canasta, pickleball, golf, and he likes to read. So without further ado, I'm going to let Jim do his presentation. And thank you, Jim. Penny's telling him what to do already.
I don't get this.
Anybody can't hear, it's like school, raise your hand.
Jimmy.
Oh, Muted.
Over there.
Oh, but he's not on Zoom.
It's a camera.
It's a beautiful morning.
They played that song every morning at 7 a.m. It was in Armed Forces Vietnam radio. They made that movie, Good Morning Vietnam. That was Armed Forces Vietnam radio. At that time, me being a medic, I used to think, it's not going to be a beautiful morning for somebody today. To this day, I have a playlist in my car that I play, and I play that song every day, just as gratitude that I'm here. This is a small look into my time as a Vietnam combat medic. A prototype baby boomer, born in May 1947. I grew up in a small town, northwest corner of Illinois. My father was a policeman. My mother was a homemaker with 4 kids by the time she was 25 years old. In my 1965 graduation year, all I knew about Vietnam was what I saw on television every night, principally by Walter Cronkite. I wasn't concerned about it. My primary objective in life was to make $5 working at Osco Drug for a date for the weekend. Like a snake swallowing a bowling ball, we baby boomers changed the world as we grew up. New schools were built because of us. We experienced Sputnik, Elvis, hula hoops, learning to drive, rock and roll, the Beatles, and the end of Camelot with the death of our Catholic president. This was a seminal time in America, I am sure. Everyone in here can tell me exactly where they were when they heard that President Kennedy had been assassinated. Freeport had just started a junior college called Highland, so I enrolled in the fall of 1965. It was somewhat revolutionary, as there were not many junior colleges at that time. In fact, we didn't have a campus. We had to wait for the high schoolers to leave. When they left school by 4 o'clock, then we went and did college classes that evening. It was a few years later that they started a campus, and it's quite the place now. At that time, you could not be drafted if you were a full-time student. It wasn't a prerequisite that you went to college back then. Many of my classmates went to work at the local factories in town, which there were several. They, like their parents before them, worked at Honeywell, Newell, Structo, Kelly Tire, and a Chrysler plant about 45 miles away. It was a time where if you quit a job one day, you probably could get a job the same day. Things were good in America, unless you were a young man. The draft was looming in the background. I'm sure I was like many of my peers. I didn't know what I wanted to do in life. I was still deciding. A deferment from the draft was given to those students with 15 hours of class time per semester. I took 15 hours the first semester, and I took 13 hours the second semester. Still considered full-time by the college, but not by the draft board. Enrolling in the spring of 1967, although I was drafted in February, I was deferred until June because they couldn't draft you out of college. When all of this was happening, I went to the county courthouse where the head of the draft board, Hazel Slomp, in fact, you can see my draft card will be coming up here one time and you can see her name right there. It was down at the local post office. Right down from her office was the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine recruiters. How convenient. I decided to enlist in the Air Force or the Navy. It would be 4 years, but I would be able to get an education and I'd see the world. The recruiters promised different things, all kinds of things to entice you. Both assured me there were plenty of slots open in the summer, so I could wait to decide which way I was going to go. In May, as soon as my semester was over, I got my draft notice to report on August 28th, 1967. I go back to both recruiters, and lo and behold, there are no slots open. They were taken by guys from Chicago and other cities around. Oh, I decided to go with the draft notice. It'll only be for 2 years. And as a young, immature guy, not knowing what could happen in life, I thought, how bad could it be? In life, there are those people that say the glass is half full. Some people, the glass is half empty. My glass is always bubbling over. When I reported for the Army, my father took me down to the train station and I boarded with 12 other young men from Freeport and the surrounding small towns. We were inducted in Chicago, where we were poked, prodded, and inspected. From there, I was sent by train to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, for basic training. Once there, we went through 8 weeks of mostly physical training, molding our bodies and minds into the Army's way of thinking. By the way, I'm still not thinking or worrying about Vietnam. Is it my glass is bubbling over, or is everyone that age feeling invincible? God will take care of me, is what I thought. After basic training, everyone is given a school to go to. It's called AIT, Advanced Individual Training. Schools such as engineering, infantry, artillery, etc. Fort Sam Houston was my school in San Antonio, Texas, for 10 weeks of medical training. I don't know why I was chosen for this. Possibly because I had some medical training in Highland in my aptitude test. I like to think it was because I was a little smarter than everybody else. Within that 10-week medical training, we didn't know if we were going to be working in a hospital or working in a field. I'm still unconcerned and thinking, what could happen to me? Although the war was heating up, I still thought I could go to Europe or stay in the United States. After all, they still needed medical personnel there also. Not everyone goes to Vietnam. When we were done with AIT, statistics were posted. Of the 399 people in my class, 396 went to Vietnam, 2 to Europe, and 1 to the US. Of course, I'm still thinking, I will probably be in the hospital, not in the field. God will take care of me, protect me. By the way, I learned many other things in AIT. That is where I learned about conscientious objectors. If you had religious convictions, such as a Seventh-day Adventist, a Mormon, or something else that you could prove, you could be a medic. You were not relieved of the service to your country. Although some medics didn't carry guns, I did. I carried an M16. We were sent home for 30-day leave and then having orders to report to Oakland, California for transport to Vietnam. All of us soldiers were processed and boarded a TWA commercial flight to Vietnam. We stopped in Hawaii for refueling, proceeding to Vietnam, but stopped again at Manila in the Philippines because the airstrip in Saigon was being bombarded. We slept there one night and arrived the next day. I can still remember the first thing that struck me when I got off the plane: the oppressive heat, the smell, and the dust flying everywhere. In Saigon, where we were first housed, we had 4 days of quote unquote jungle school, basically an indoctrination of how things were done, some camouflage training and how to recognize snakes, bugs, etc. After that, I rode a big open truck called a Deuce and a Half through the streets of Saigon, all teeming with people and motorbikes. Then into the countryside on the only highway there was, Highway 1, to my destination, Dao Tiang in War Zone C, about 45 miles northwest of Tan Son Nhut Air Base in Saigon, which is where most of the supplies for Vietnam came through at that time, that big, huge air base. Being a medic, I was assigned to headquarters company, where I and all the other medics for the entire base stayed. We had to do menial chores during the day, and at night, listen to the radio for incoming directions. Having been there about 4 or 5 days, I'm starting to think Vietnam is okay. I'm in a fortified camp, hot, regular food. They even had a swimming pool, which was left over from the French when they were there. At night, sometimes we had to put up with incoming rockets, but still okay. Then one night about 4 a.m, an officer came into our hooch and said, "We need the next 5 guys to come with him." He further told us 5 medics were either wounded or killed last night and you soldiers are the replacements. So now I'm assigned to Bravo Company, 3rd Battalion, 25th Infantry, 2nd Platoon, 2nd Squad, B322. I'm now with my new family for the rest of my 12-month tour. I was given a bed in a hooch to keep whatever I owned whenever I was in base camp. From there, our company would carry out whatever orders we were given from the officers or the intelligence division. The first week was uneventful. We would ride out in a deuce and a half and do what they called road security, which is basically sitting there and guarding the highway. This was done in what we call the Hobo Woods or the Michelin Rubber Plantation. Miles and miles of tall trees, all planted the same distance from each other. So wherever you looked, they were all perfect. There was a huge canopy above that kept the sun out so it was cool. And under every tree, there was a little dish that the drippings came into. And that's how they made rubber back in the day. Much like when you're doing maple syrup, the drippings come out and that's how they do it. Colonialism was still alive in the world back then. There was the French Congo, England had India, there was the Belgian Congo. Obviously, none of that is there today. Now it's Zaire and other names that I don't know. Vietnam was a French colonial country after World War II. On maps, it was called French Indochina. France used it as a place to get rubber to make trees. The Michelin forests were still there when we arrived. The French army was defeated in 1954 at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. That first week, every night, we would go back to our secure base camp with regular food, showers, and an enlisted man's club. Vietnam was known as French Indochina, and some still spoke French at the time I was there. When I went into the villages, because I was the medic, I was treated with a little more reverence by the villagers. They called me Boxy, which was Vietnamese for doctor. And they would all gather around me like I was Santa Claus, like I was something, you know. So it was great for me. Then early one morning, my company of about 150 men were sent out into the field by helicopter. We all went to our airstrip and waited for the helicopter to pick us up. It would land and 6 of us would get in the chopper and we'd all take off in a group called an Eagle flight. Approximately 12 choppers, 6 on each side. We were sent to a pre-designated point. If it was a hot LZ landing zone, the helicopters would come in fast and barely stop with their machine guns blazing and you would jump out. If it was not a hot LZ, they would stop and you could just get out and semi-leisurely, although you ran for cover. So now we were out in the countryside, what we called the boonies. We had orders to set up a perimeter and stay somewhere closer, else march somewhere else until we contacted the enemy. Then at night, we'd have to dig a foxhole for cover and stay there. A lot of times we were given orders to go to a village and look for Viet Cong because we knew there were VC there. But you didn't know who they were. They had been farmers during the day, VC at night. Sometimes there were abuses by soldiers. Maybe some of our friends or their friends had been killed or wounded in that village, and the guys would go in and take their anger out on the civilians. One of the most publicized versions of this was the My Lai massacre. 504 people were killed, mostly women and children, by Lieutenant William Calley's men. He was later convicted and sentenced to 10 years in confinement. One of the scariest times for me in Vietnam was the ambush patrol. At dusk, every night, we would send out 5 or 6 guys, 1 to 2, 3 to 4 miles out in the boonies, in the jungle. We'd find a path, get back about 10 yards from the path, set up our mines. They had what they call claymore mines, aim them at the path. Anyone walking by on the path, we'd set up our ambush, which meant we'd throw our grenades, shoot our ammunition, set off the mines and everything in our arsenal. In Vietnam, anybody out after 8 o'clock at night was considered the enemy. It was considered a free fire zone. You can, obviously not in the big cities, but you could shoot anybody you wanted if they're out after 8 o'clock at night. On our ambush, one soldier would go out and stay awake for an hour. And you'd sit there, you'd sit on your helmet and you just watch the path. It's dark, just to see if somebody comes down the path. Your hour is up, you waited, woke the next guy up. He is turned. You go, wake up, wake up, wake up. And then he, okay, I'm awake. And then it's his turn for an hour. It went all the way till the morning. We'd wet a towel with mosquito repellent, wrap it around your head and put the mosquito repellent so it was perfectly, you were wet. All you could do was see out your eyes because the mosquitoes and the bugs. A medic went out every time. Not all the soldiers had to go out on every ambush. In my company, the medic went out with every ambush. Once you set up an ambush, you had to stay there and do a couple other things and see what would happen. But you had given away your position and you're 3 miles out in the boonies, not where your people are at. So you're kind of giving away your position and what are you going to do? They would sometimes regroup somewhere down the road. We'd set up ambushes many times in a cemetery. A couple times we set them up in a Catholic church. So I'm out walking with my platoon, humping the boonies every day. Being the medic, I had some special privileges and tasks, like passing out salt tablets because of the humidity and the heat. One of the big things in Vietnam, you didn't want anybody to get heat prostration or heat stroke. And by making sure everybody took salt tablets in that every day, that was one of the preventatives. I didn't have to walk point, which is the first guy in line, which is usually the first guy shot by the enemy. But I did walk from front to back in the line to check with my guys. I didn't have to carry extra ammunition. My sole duty was to take care of my men. I was encouraged not to fraternize or to get close to them because of who I was, and I may be the last person they ever see. I carried my weapon, water, a large medical bag full of bandages, quinine pills, which we passed out for malaria, aspirin, salt tablets, Band-Aids, scissors, morphine, and other items that I needed to fulfill my duties. We always walked in a line. I also got to walk in the middle of the men, back in what they called the CP, the command post. That would be the lieutenant, the radio operator who was the RTO, myself, and usually another officer. I guess if I was in command, I'd want the doctor with me, right? Actually, it was a blessing and a curse, as the RTO had an antenna attached to his radio. So the enemy knew where the CP was, and that's where they always started shooting for first, that antenna, because they didn't want to have any other help being called in. We had been walking in the jungle for a couple of days. It had been pretty uneventful, except 2 VC had stumbled into 2 of our men. They both shot at each other, no casualties. Our company had marched all day, and we stopped for our night position. The RTO and I were supposed to dig our own hole, our bunker, for sleeping. But we were tired, and the ground was hard. So we only dug down about 12 inches and went to sleep. About 1 a.m., we came under attack by a large enemy force that was trying to overrun our positions. Looking back, it probably seemed funny. We both had our heads in the hole and our bodies sticking out. We could hear the VC talking in between the shooting. There were flares going off. You could see the outline of the enemy. Bullets were zinging by, which is a good thing, because they always said the bullet you didn't hear is the one that killed you. The RTO, another soldier, and I decided to pull back to the battalion command post for safety because we were being overrun. The other soldier had been wounded, and I had his arm around my neck as I was helping him walk. We retreated to safety until the next morning when everything was over. It was called the Battle of Good Friday. The next morning, newsmen and officers landed in their helicopters, took pictures, and shook hands for the victory we had won. I think the enemy lost 180 people, and we had 30 casualties. We packed up that day and continued doing what we had been doing, looking for the enemy. Interestingly, we were humping the boonies about 3 weeks later, and we came right back and marched right through the same place where we had the battle. There were still remnants of the fight still laying around on the ground. Many soldiers will tell you that Vietnam was a lot of boredom, surrounded by chaos when the fighting starts. Some of the terms that came out of the Vietnam War, we had to destroy the village to save it. Vietnam was pretty much based on what they called the domino theory. That was if Vietnam falls, then Japan will fall, Philippines will fall, and America will fall. We'll all be communists. Looking back, we can say we could lump those into a lot of areas we were wrong about. I was out in the field until the end of August and came back to base camp maybe 4 times for a couple of days. I continued doing the same thing until the end of August when I was given a 5-day pass to Bangkok, Thailand for R&R, rest and relaxation. When I came back to the field from that, I was changed. I had seen The Graduate in Thailand. I had seen real people, real food. I came back, I was scared. I was wounded 2 weeks later. Up until then, I wasn't worried about getting killed or wounded. I knew I was going to be okay. My company, how I got wounded was my company was in a fire support base near Tay Ninh City that was set up there. Naturally, the VC didn't want it there and tried to overrun the base. It was night. There was an attack. Someone was shot and they yelled for Doc. I went, was dragging him back when an explosion went off next to me. It was an RPG, which is called a rocket-propelled grenade, which is much like a bazooka. It blew me in the air a few feet. I got back up, continued carrying the wounded man, back to our aid station. I had a tingling in my arm and a little blood on my chest, but I felt okay. But later the next morning, I was put on a stretcher with my arm in a sling, stayed there for a while, and then was flown to Cu Chi in a helicopter, just like you see on MASH, when the outside, just like on MASH. They sewed a tube in my side to keep my lung from collapsing. They left the shrapnel in my shoulder and my side, which is still there. I get a pension. I'm 40% disabled. Are you impressed? They left it all in there, still there. I was then sent to Japan for a day or two and then to Denver, Colorado. I had $1 million wound. I got to go home. I felt guilty on the hospital plane. I had my arm in a sling and a couple of bandages, while everyone else on that plane was on stretchers and more seriously wounded. I felt real guilty, like, I'm fine. Why am I going home? I was wounded on September 13th, 1968, which was, by the way, is a Friday the 13th. My parents were notified by telegram. This telegram stated, your son was wounded in the Republic of Vietnam, province of, I think it was Cu Chi. More things will follow later. That's all they got. I went back to I was wounded on September 13th, 1968, went back to active duty on January 1st, 1969. I was sent to the Oakland Army Terminal, the same place that I went through before going to Vietnam. I checked shot records for the plague, and whatever else we had. And back then we had the Hong Kong flu, which was everybody had in 1969. I was discharged August 28th, 1969. I have 3 little letters that I sent home. We found these. I wrote them when I was in the hospital, and they gave you paper, the Armed Forces, or American Red Cross. And I wrote 3 little letters, and I'm going to read them to you. They're kind of hard to read because my arm was strapped here. But this one was September 19th. Dear Mom and Dad, well, today they took the tube out of my side. It really surprised me. This sounds real stupid, but it really surprised me. It was about 18 inches long and it was in me about 9 inches. Guess what? Tomorrow I go to Japan. Boy, am I glad. I'll get to see some more girls and do some more stuff. That's because in the hospital is the first time we'd ever seen an American girl being out in the boonies. By the time I get back, I'll be getting short. That means I didn't have much time left to serve in Vietnam. That's if I stay there a long time, hoping I was going to stay in the hospital a couple months. They don't know now, but I'm either going to Japan or Okinawa. I got a Purple Heart the other day. Well, I guess I'll go. Love, Jimmy. Then I have my Purple Heart back there on the whatever, if you want to look. So here I am. That was September 19th, I think I wrote. This is September 22nd. Well, I'm here at the hospital doing nothing. When I first got here, they put me in Ward 811 till they decide what they're going to do to you. Everybody I came with is gone except for me. I went over and took another x-ray today. They're going to sew me up tomorrow, I guess. It'll only take about 3 or 4 stitches in my side. They didn't take the shrapnel out of you. They just let it in because it won't hurt you. They had a small combo playing music in the ward. I was just watching TV. Beetle Bailey was on. The show was just like back in the United States, only it had Japanese voices. I saw James Coburn on TV and he was speaking Japanese. It was the same in Thailand. There I saw the Flintstones and Perry Mason. They were speaking Thai. It was really funny. All I'm doing is getting fat. 3 meals a day, and then I eat malteds and cake in between. Yes, I'm going to the dental clinic to get my teeth cleaned and fixed tomorrow. This is just like home, hot water and showers. It's like back in the United States. They have air conditioning and toilets and everything. From the radio, I guess it's getting cold back home. So Bob is fixing up the Safari, which was my brother-in-law, and that's a car deal thing. And I guess I'll use it to haul my stock car. I think I'll race motorcycles when I get back home. I guess I'll get a pass after I'm here in the hospital for 14 days. They give you a pass to go into town. Then I'm going to go downtown and eat something and get a steam bath. Well, I guess I'm good for now. Love, Jimmy. Last one, September 28th. Dear Mom and Dad, well, you asked if my time in the hospital counted toward overseas tour. Well, now that I'm going home, I'm all done overseas. I don't have to go back. I'm going to Fitzsimmons Army Hospital in Denver, Colorado when I go. A piece of shrapnel went into my back, into my left lung. The piece wasn't very big. I have a little drawing here, about this big. Some of the other pieces went into the back of my left arm and they hit a nerve. For a while, I didn't have any feeling in parts of my hand, but it's all coming back now. I know because my hand aches all the time. I couldn't grip anything hard for a while, but it's coming back. I can squeeze 90 pounds with my right hand and 30 pounds with my left. But I couldn't even shuffle cards then, but now I can. I got hit and taken in, went to the hospital there by helicopter, stayed a few hours. Then I went to Cu Chi by helicopter and stayed till the 20th. Then I flew to Tan Son Nhut Air Base in Saigon and stayed one night. And they flew me by jet here. Well, I guess I'll go. Love, Jimmy. When I was in the hospital, I got to call home once. They did not have telephone service there, but we got to speak. They woke us up about 3 a.m. And back then they had ham radios. So they had a person from the Red Cross came in, and I would speak into it to my mother who answered. I say, "Hi, Mom, over." And then that person would transfer it to another ham radio operator somewhere in the United States, and then they transfer it to her. She'd say something and say, "Hi, Jim," or "Hi, son," or whatever, over. And we had a little conversation. So I got to talk to them while I was there. Up until then, they didn't know. The telegram said I'd been wounded. That didn't know if I hurt a hangnail or I lost my arms. You know, they just said I'd been wounded. After being but that's not the end of my story. After being discharged from the Army, I went back to my local community college and hung out with my friends. I can still remember going to a dance on Friday night. I can tell you right where I stood. It was at Highland College, and I was standing back in the corner, looking at everyone and having a little sense of superiority. They were all like I was, but I felt so different and older, having been through the war. They seemed so young, although we were all the same age. My father had me join the VFW, but it wasn't for me. I was in my mid-20s and they were all old in their 40s and 50s. I got married, had 3 boys, finished my college education, was living a life not talking about Vietnam. It was still something that had a bad connotation. Draft dodgers, baby killers, head state. How many of you have seen the movie Platoon? I'm assuming a lot of people have. Well, one night, I was working late at the post office in May 1987. I saw a People magazine with the headline, and it's over here. Oliver Stone, basically the real men of Platoon. I opened it up, read the article, saw the pictures, and was stunned. These were all the guys that were my friends that I knew. Right then, I called one of the men. His wife answered and said they were at a reunion in Chicago. Me being from Northern Illinois, gee. I called him up and he said he didn't know how to get in touch with me because they didn't know my name. I was only known as Doc. Our platoon had another big reunion, including our wives in Washington, D.C. We were interviewed on Nightline and a couple other news agencies. We traveled together to the Vietnam Wall, which had been dedicated just 5 years earlier. My platoon was honored at a reception by a group called the Vietnam Veterans of America, VVA. Stone was given an award for the movie Platoon. He gave a little speech and then said, "I want the real men of Platoon to come up on stage." He introduced us all individually as we walked up, and we're all given a round of applause. It was a celebratory weekend. It was filled with mixed emotions as we had never been honored as Vietnam veterans before. We men bonded together. We had not seen each other in 20 years, yet we felt we had known each other our whole lives. The war ended officially in 1975. For many years, nothing was talked about unless you were involved personally. When Oliver Stone came out with Platoon and then the movie Born on 4th of July, then it started conversations about the Vietnam War. Up until then, there were hardly any movies about Vietnam. I can only think of one, and that was Green Berets with John Wayne, which wasn't very realistic. After Platoon, there was Apocalypse Now, The Deer Hunter, Full Metal Jacket, and some other movies. These movies helped unleash positive sentiment about Vietnam. Since then, we had welcome home marches all over America. Still, when I see a Vietnam veteran, a lot of them will say, "Welcome home." Whenever, even right now, if I see one, a lot of them will say that. Even though I was going to Vietnam in 1967, I didn't protest or burn my draft card. I still believed in Chevrolet, apple pie, and America. People were protesting all over, but it was mostly made the news, big universities, Berkeley, Columbia, UCLA. 1968 was a tumultuous year for America. We had the Tet Offensive in Vietnam after we had been told that we're winning the war, and all of a sudden they had taken over the American embassy. Martin Luther King was shot. Riots across America. Bobby Kennedy was shot. President Johnson decided not to run for re-election, and Walter Cronkite said on national TV he would not and could not support the war, which kind of stunned America. No, right then it changed. Everyone who served in Vietnam has the same story, but different. We all felt lonely at times, homesick, and angry. For every man serving in the field of combat, there were approximately 9 people behind the lines: cooks, supply, transportation, construction, communication. Even though they were not being shot at daily, they possibly could have served some combat. Even though we lumped Vietnam into one country, geographically it was very different. Men in the north had mountains. Men in the south, which they called the Delta, had canals and rivers, and they did a lot of traveling in boats. I had mostly flatlands with an occasional mountain, but there was one constant: jungles everywhere, no matter where, jungles. Some statistics: 58,148 people were killed in Vietnam and countless wounded for life, mentally or physically. The average age for a Vietnam veteran was 19. 5 men killed were 16, and the oldest was 62. Of those killed, 61% were younger than 21. 11,600 were younger than 20. We will probably never know the toll it took mentally. The Army didn't even recognize PTSD until 1980, 5 years after the war ended. Vietnam left an impression on everyone from my generation, whether you knew someone there or you saw it on TV. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I'm going to have anybody that has any questions, but I would like to thank my IT guy, Joe Alcanito. I think Steve Jobs used to call him. And then Pam, promoter extraordinaire. And the real person I need to thank is my wife, right? Penny is her name. And she saved me from myself. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her. So, anybody got any questions? No, I don't want any questions like, did you ever shoot anybody? Because I did a talk at a high school once and that's what they asked.
A lot of the troops weren't treated well when they returned. You were a wounded medic. What was your?
I did not come like the rest of them. I came in a hospital plane and was landed at a place called Travis Air Force Base in Sacramento, California. I did have one little episode when I was going back and forth to an airport. And back then they had military standby. You got to get on a plane cheap and you had to wear your uniform. And I had my uniform on, and I mean, I looked a little younger than I looked a lot younger, okay? And a couple of real Army guys came up to me and said, "You don't have those medals. You couldn't have been there." I mean, that was the only episode I ever had, but a lot of guys had that. That all goes back to protesting the Vietnam War. But like I said, I flew on a hospital plane, so I never had any of that.
Can you describe your medical training in a little more detail?
Basically, it was 8 hours of training every day, and you went in. It was just like going to school, and they taught us how to work in a hospital. We had the dummies that you practice on, and then they would have some more training of if you weren't in a hospital. Like me, I'm never going to be in combat. You know, God takes care of me. But so they would show you how to you take care of an open wound, that kind of stuff. And like I said, they gave you the training both ways. Pretty basic training. A lot of mine was OJT, you know what I mean? I was out in the boonies. So I'm the first guy there. I'm not worried that he's got a cut on his arm. I'm trying to do a lot of other things for him. Next, Ed.
How many people were in the platoon and how many medics?
I think a full company is 220 and they had 3 platoons and then they had what they call a weapons platoon, which stayed behind, and they were the guys that did the mortars and all that kind of stuff. They would always use, I can't remember, it was 3 or 4 squads in each platoon. Like I said, we had 150 guys, and Vietnam was not like World War II. A whole company would all stay together their tour. Vietnam, guys were coming and going. You had 1 year tour, you came in April 10th, you stay till April 10th next year. Well, then the next guy's leaving April 20th. So there was always a state of flux, guys coming and going. Maybe somebody's wounded, maybe somebody's on R&R, maybe he got stung by a bee and he has to go in, things like that. So I think officially a squad was, I'm not sure, I don't remember.
How many?
So there was a medic, but we were always short. We was always short a medic, and sometimes I would have to do the first squad and the second squad, and we were waiting for another medic to come.
Did you wear a helmet with the Red Cross?
No, in fact,
You just earned it, right?
there's some pictures here, they didn't do that in Vietnam. They'd have a helicopter that came in, but not if there was a battle. No, that was like a target.
Yeah.
And they always had the rumors, they got 500 piastres for killing a medic and 1,000 piastres for killing an officer, that kind of thing. Yes, Joanne.
Did they offer you any opportunities coming home to do something with the medical training to turn it into it?
No, when I was transferred to Oakland Army Terminal, guys going to Vietnam, I checked their shot records every night. No, yes, I should say. There was always things, yeah, re-enlist and we'll give you this and this, which never happened. Re-enlist for a year and we'll give you a new car and you can be stationed in New York. Yeah, right, for like 2 weeks and now you're back in the boonies.
What career path did you take after coming back?
I just wandered. No, I got married. I went to work at a local factory. My father was in the car business and I've always been kind of in the car business on the side. I went to work at a company called Newell Companies. Geez, I was there 18 or 19 years. Then I went to work selling cars at a new car dealership, which wasn't what I thought. Then I got a job. My Vietnam experience, being a veteran, got me front of the line. Being a disabled veteran got me the front of the line, so I got a job at the post office, which turned out to be a pretty good deal. And I worked there for just 23 years, retired in 2003. Living the life down here. Yes.
Got a kind of a funny story. I did kind of what you're doing with my grandchildren. And so on Veterans Day, they had me come in and talk about Vietnam and my experience and the history. And I didn't get into a whole lot of, because these are kids maybe, in the 4th or 5th grade.
Yes,
something like
yes.
that. So when I was done, I said, does anybody have any questions? And of course, I talked about the wall. And one of the kids stood up and the teacher was kind of cringing. And he said, is your name on the wall, Lieutenant Hogan? Why? So the teacher's over there cringing. I said, not yet.
Paul,
You said you weren't afraid until after you went on R&R
right.
and you came back afraid. I mean, what happened? What changed you? That
I don't know what changed me. Like I said, I got to Thailand and I saw real people, real food, movie, a couple other things. And up until then, I don't know if I was just callous, being out in the field every day and just doing it, not thinking about it. Yeah. Then I got back and I was scared. Yes.
Did you witness any chemical warfare in Vietnam?
You know what, I'm humping the boonies and all I know is they're spraying Agent Orange
Yeah, yeah.
places, but you know, that's not gonna hurt you, remember? I worked with a guy who was in the Air Force that did Agent Orange. He said every week he got new shoes about every 3 days because it ate through his boots every week. Barrels of Agent Orange, but you know, it's not gonna hurt you. Unfortunately, you know, now and then the government doesn't tell you the truth. Anybody else? Yes.
Have you gone back or have you considered going back?
There was a time a while back, I thought, and I think a lot of guys went back. It was kind of, they gave a lot of tours. It was kind of a thing to do maybe 20 years ago. But if you go back now, in my area of operations, we had one big mountain. It was called Nui Ba Din, all right? It was called the Black Virgin Mountain. You could see it for 30 miles around. There's now a big amusement park on that mountain. And there's a place called Cu-Chi, which was our 25th Infantry headquarters. That's still a big tourist attraction because while the war was going on, the VC had built tunnels under this huge complex. Nobody knew it was there for years till the war was over. And the VC was underneath us all the time. And you can now go there and go through those tunnels. They had what they called tunnel rats back in Vietnam. Little guys, littler than me, our guys would go down in those tunnels with a pistol and see if there was anybody down there. Like I said, you can still go through those tunnels now. It's the tourist attraction.
Did the military prepare you with talking points prior to going to Vietnam and then post talking points when you came home to say what you should be saying?
So
Yeah.
the place I'm stationed at in Oakland, California is where the Army guys went over and where they came back. They came back right out of the jungle. Guys would land at the Oakland Army Terminal still in their fatigues that they wore out in the jungle. They were just so happy to go. And then when they got there, they got to get one big meal, they got orders, they got paid, they took a shower and blah, blah, blah. That's all they got. That was what the Army prepared you for. Because everybody was in a hurry to get home. I don't think anybody would have stayed and listened to anything that they would have said. They didn't do anything that I know of. Obviously, maybe depending on where you went through, I think and back then, Vietnam, you either went through Oakland, California, Fort Lewis, Washington, and I think Fort Dix, New Jersey. That was about the only three places they had. Fort Lewis, Washington, I think. Yes.
What was the Army's monthly combat pay?
$67. Oh, no, I think I got $68 a month and like $30 combat pay.
Don't forget free postage.
Free, I got a letter there. You see it? You get to send a letter. You could send all you want at home. You just wrote free in the thing. And I got one of them over there. Yeah. But obviously we didn't make much money back then. It's 67. Construction workers were making $3.25 an hour or something like that, but still. Anybody else? Yes.
Why do you think the Vietnamese right now really like Americans?
Where's my billfold? It's all about the money, isn't it? Yeah. Pretty much. We're looking back on Vietnam now and like, especially if you lost somebody there or knew somebody there, it's a shame what happened because we did not gain anything. I don't know what it was for. You know, at the time, we didn't think that, obviously. We just did what we were told. We have an expression in the service or whatever. When they say jump, you say how high on the way up. That's how it was. Anybody else?
Let me just preface this. If you think you want to go back, just go halfway. Go to Hawaii and come back.
I don't know. I don't know why I want to go back. I got all the heat I want down here, right?
So when I was in the 7th grade, a girl I knew's father was career Air Force. And he was flying a transport plane that was shot down, and obviously he never came back.
Mm-hmm.
About 5 years ago, some classified information was released that 5 presidents knew that the situation there was unwinnable. Yet they kept sending troops and, hearing that, knowing that this girl's father died, seeing his name at the wall. I mean, I just lost it. I
Yeah.
mean, what
And,
What was your
and
reaction?
her, and think of her every day. I'll tell you a little story. Penny and I went to a reunion once in a town called St. Anne's, Illinois. It was way down almost into Missouri. They had a huge, big celebration for us, the men of Platoon. For 5 miles around, they had flags about every 100 yards. There must have had been 10,000 flags. We went there and went to a thing like this. The reason it was at this town called St. Anne's, might have been 1,000 people, but they had an inordinate amount of people that had been killed, or of soldiers from that town. I think it was like 16 from that little town. They had people stand up. Penny and I were both crying. I mean, these 2 people that were 75 years old stood up, and they had 2 sons or something that were killed there. It was like, no matter how old, if you've lost a son or a daughter or something like that, you never get over it. And this has got to make you feel just terrible when you think we didn't accomplish anything. It was terribly sad. We had tears in our eyes, and I don't cry. She says I don't cry.
What's your perspective now, all these years later, looking at the wars that we have been in, like Afghanistan and Iraq, and what are your feelings for these, for the people that were now are 20 years old going and having to do this?
So back then, we didn't know. He talked about the presidents knew. I think there's something that America was giving money to the Vietnamese army back in the late 50s. John F. Kennedy knew about it. Probably goes along with the Cuban Missile Crisis and blah, blah, blah. But somewhere along in America, you have to decide, are we still the world's policeman? Are we the one that's going to take care of everybody? Somebody has to, or are we going to let somebody else do it? But I'm not pro, what do I want to say? I'm not pro Army, even though I was in the Army and it was a different time. I just think it's so sad that we are trying to impose our will on other countries. That's it for me. I'm pretty simple. Any other questions? Must be something. Yes.
Did you have any interaction with protesters, either for or against, or?
We had a couple of kids in our little town that burnt their draft cards. No, I was trying to have a date this weekend, I just wasn't involved in. My family was, I would guess you'd call them apolitical. It's not like we sat around at supper every night and talked about politics, talked about the war, just went on with my little bitty life. 18, 19 years old, you're not thinking about anything but, Mary and Penny. No. Hi.
If you go on YouTube, Oliver Stone, The Untold History of the United States, and if you go on YouTube and just put in Oliver Stone Vietnam, he'll talk about the whole thing about Vietnam and about that we thought we were such big shots that we could go into Vietnam and win the war because these people are, not good. I mean, they're with all our might and everything, we'd win the war, and we found out.
Yeah.
But that's a good thing for anybody in the room that wants to expand on this. Oliver Stone,
Yeah.
just go to YouTube.
Because of his movies, it revamped the VA medical system. Up until those movies, and we talked about Vietnam, I mean, VA hospitals were not very good back in the 90s, a lot of them. People weren't aware of any of that stuff. Well, like I said, those movies kind of opened it up and created a dialogue that still somewhat goes on today. That's one good thing about Oliver Stone. He had been to Vietnam before he was in the Army. His family was real rich. There's a little article in one of these things about one of the guys talking to Oliver Stone about taking a can opener or opening a can of beans, and he said he didn't know how to do it because he had maids that did that. So, yes.
And you said you were in the jungle, so other than being shot at, what was like a concern, like snakes or spiders or?
I was the medic, so I wasn't in the guy in the front. And it was like you see on TV a lot of times, depending on where you went. Some jungles, they had machete guy up front. A lot of times we walked on rice paddies everywhere. And they told you not to, you know what a rice paddy looks like? It's a little dike and then water in between. Told you don't walk on the rice paddies because that's where the enemy put landmines that you stood on. Being lazy Americans, we always walked on the rice paddies. You don't want to get your feet wet. But that was
Some of the other booby traps.
right. Depending on the jungle, and like I said, there was paths in the jungle and you were never supposed to walk on the path, but they knew what they called lazy Americans would walk on the path. And there would be a booby trap or something. A lot of times it was just walking and looking for this because you're going to, supposedly there's some Viet Cong up there and some general up above is flying around in his helicopter telling you that. Well, what another sidebar as a judge would say or whatever it is. We had the Vietnam War, and if you were a career Army man, you were going to stay in for life. One of the ways to advance your career was to go to Vietnam. It was like a fast track. One of the ways you did that was to get an infantry platoon and go out in the boonies and kill a lot of people, report that we killed whatever. So there was a lot of times that guys may or may not, let me back up. There'd be a big battle and they'd say, we killed 110 VC last night, but there was no bodies out there. They would be, the VC would always drag their bodies away, but this lieutenant or captain would say, oh, they drug them all away. Well, it created a lot of abuses. Guys got to move up the ladder by saying we killed this many and blah, blah, blah. It was like a fast track to moving up to being a captain and whatever you wanted to be. So that part of Vietnam, there was some abuses there looking back, but we didn't know it at the time. You know, it's not like today in a war, you hear about it within an hour because of cell phones. Back then, you didn't hear about it. It'd take a week. My mother and father got the telegram the same day as my first letter came home, like 6 days. So, anybody else? Yes.
A lot of the career Marines I served with, they were going back, they would have went back for a third tour. And a lot of them were getting out and going into the reserve because they had already done 2 tours.
Right.
And as you know, the tour was either a year, 13 months, not like today where they go shorter times, but they go more often. They're always being pulled away from the family. But it was so bad for the Marines were so short of men that the career guys were back in for a third tour. It wasn't unusual.
A lot of guys signed up for another tour. They'd served 2 or 3 tours in Vietnam. That's because we called it like Dodge City. Every morning at 7 o'clock, it's a beautiful morning, blah, blah, blah. And then a guy would say, saddle up, and you'd put your stuff on and you walk out. Well, we called it Dodge City. You could kind of do what you want. What are they going to do if you don't go out? Send you to jail? Good. Nobody's shooting me at me in jail, right? So you got away with a lot of stuff that you wouldn't have if you were back in base camp. Didn't necessarily have to shave every day. A lot of stuff. Yeah. But a lot of guys stayed over there because they liked it. They didn't want to come back to the United States and have to clean your clothes, get up every morning at a certain time, that kind of stuff. Like I said, we call it, we're getting out of Dodge today. That kind of a thing. Yeah,
Were you ever teamed up with troops from South Vietnam when you went out on your patrols?
very rarely. They were there, but we weren't with them. They always had one or two, they called them Chu Hois. That would have been Vietnamese VC soldiers that decided they were gonna switch over to us. So they would be like up front with our CP or our captain or whoever it was and telling them things. And they had dog handlers back then that could smell. I was there in 68. It really changed starting in 69, 70, 71, 72. A fair amount of drug abuse. I didn't see any of that. My first time, one of my first times out walking in the field, we were walking into a village. And over there was like tables and racks over there and over there, marijuana being dried. The guys are stuffing it into their pockets, you know, and I'm saying, what are they doing? I'm from Freeport. What are you doing? You know, I didn't know what they were talking about, you know, it was everywhere, you know. Later on, there was lots of, I guess, drug abuse. Very easy to have drug abuse back in base camp. You have any drug abuse out here, it's gonna kill you.
What did the American soldiers think about the South Vietnamese soldiers?
Oh, yeah.
What was their opinion of the South, you know, supposedly are,
Less,
that's,
pretty much, because they were all in it for the money. They have been fighting for years and years and years. I guess you could say that about lots of countries in the world. They've been fighting for centuries. It's not a big deal. And a lot of South Vietnamese, when things got tough, they'd throw their weapons down and now they're farmers, right? They're our friends till we needed them. Yes,
Jim, I was in the artillery.
yes.
How accurate were we? Were we? The rounds coming in?
Unbelievably accurate. You know that, right? Great, right? So if we're getting attacked and we're getting overrun, like at the place I was wounded, we're getting overrun. So the artillery put in what they call beehive rounds. They're little bitty, I'd call them arrows. They were like a shotgun. Anything in front of that is gone. I mean, it just wiped everything out. But if you were out in the field and you were attacking some fortified area and you couldn't get to it, you'd pull back, call in the artillery, which were those guys, maybe 10 miles away or 5 miles away, 3 miles away. They could send that artillery in to, like, they would march it right across, and there would be a guy up front that called a forward observer, and he'd be watching where these shells are hitting. And if they're not hitting close, he's calling back and telling them to make an adjustment. And now they're falling right on the enemy. One time we had come into a big fortified position and we couldn't do anything with it. We went way back and we called in artillery. And I don't know what it was, but I could barely, I don't know, it was a 500-pound round or whatever it was. I could barely see it hit, but as some shrapnel flew like zoom, zoom, and you could see little shards of metal, and you wonder how anybody ever survived. How could they survive this? Because we had bombs that we dropped from jets, 500 or 1,000 pounders or whatever it was. Yeah, the artillery saved us, basically.
Well, we had missions, you know, night and day, but we
Yes.
never got
Nobody ever said, was it good, bad, or whatever?
what the
Yeah.
results were, you know.
One time we blew an ambush, that just brought this up, and we ran back, and we were outside of a camp, and they dropped napalm, and napalm is sticky jelly. And I can still remember one thing napalm does, it landed real close. It sucked the air right out of my lungs. When it lands and then it explodes and it went suck the air out. And I had some on my weapons. And then I got down, but they dropped it too close. It was a mistake. But when you're over there, it's like everything else. You just did what you were told. It was a different time. We didn't know. Guess I think that's why they have guys in their service that are 19 and 20, right? Still in young and invincible, or my glass is bubbling over.
How many people do you think were in Vietnam in this audience?
I'll ask the question. How many people were in Vietnam? How many people were in the service? Wow. See, and I wouldn't know that. I guess it's because Vietnam guys don't talk to each other unless they're in that I would know that you were in Vietnam, right? I guess there's no VFW club down here, whatever.
You have to buy a lot of beers.
Yeah. And like I said, everybody had their own version of Vietnam. For me, I look back, this sounds terrible. It was probably one of the best things that happened to me. I get a little pension from the service. It got me a job. Probably made me grow up somewhat. I'm still working on that.
Education.
Oh, yes, and I used it to get a college degree. It helped pay for my NIU.
But you wouldn't want to do it again.
Oh, no. I think a lot of guys would say that, but they would never do it again. Looking back, it was kind of okay. But they would never do it again. Oh, no. I went to medic training. A lot of guys went to Fort Polk, Louisiana, which was infantry, which like we used to call cannon fodder. I mean, those are the guys that are, you know what I mean? They give up with their lives. A lot of them. I was a 91 A10, and then after you're there a little bit, you got a badge that said you were a combat medic, and I think that was a 91 B20 or whatever it was. US 54820-901. Had to say that every day in basic training before they would give you your food. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Thanks. But if you want to sign up for my fan club. Was that Was it?
Recording stopped.
Thank you. You did a good job. Hey.
What was that?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I thought everybody came because they thought there was tenderness.
You've done this before.
Like 20 years ago, I did it to like a fourth grade. Nothing like that.
This is more like second grade.
Hey.
Really, really.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. You came. We're doing basic training. Oh, I was down at the wall. Okay, so were you, you were a no sensor? No, I was for Army.
You didn't turn yours off.
I went to Fort Lee. Okay.
I was in
Months. When I was in the South, for my 3-day pack.
You need raising children.
Home, I never know how my mom said.
It's a full-time job.
Friday, home on Saturday, back on Sunday night. I've been doing it on Monday. We had like a week and a half in Virginia. Sergeant come down. I didn't want to go to some. Oh my God,
Yeah, it was nice.
Dad grew up in River, Minnesota. Oh, I think I talked to you. Yes, yeah, okay. Oh, Pine River, yeah. North of Greenville. Yep. Every summer we had to go up to Lake Aid. Oh, yeah, I know. My wife's. Okay, right. No, it was a good experience to me. Life was different. Everybody, it was different. It's the same but different.